The spotlight begins to flicker. It was the 96th Academy Awards. The Dolby Theater sparkled with its usual grandeur, stars dressed in elegance, diamonds glittering beneath 1,000 lights, camera flashes dancing across velvet gowns and black tuxedos. But that night, something was different. Not in the sky or in the gold-lined walls of the theater, but in the air itself. Something felt heavy, unsaid, waiting to break open like a soft whisper before a storm. Tom Hanks, the beloved heart of Hollywood, stood backstage, clutching the edge of a worn card, the kind used to announce the Best Humanitarian Award. His hands, always steady on screen, now trembled, the words on the paper blurring through teary eyes. He had performed for decades, from the shores of Normandy to deserted islands to space missions gone wrong, yet tonight, his heart beat like it had never been on stage before. Not for the cameras, not for the world, but for something personal. Something sacred. Keanu Reeves, standing only a few feet away in a crisp black suit with a quiet presence that needed no words, noticed it. He had always been observant, especially with those whose eyes hid a kind of tiredness no one else noticed. And tonight, Tom looked tired. Not the kind that a long evening caused, but the kind that came from carrying a private weight. Sandra Bullock, radiant in deep emerald green, leaned in slightly from the other side of the stage, her brows furrowed with the same concern. She noticed it too. Tom hadn't made eye contact with anyone in the last 20 minutes, and he had been muttering something to himself in the dressing room mirror earlier, something about not being ready. The presenter before him, a young rising star, stepped off the stage to a polite applause, and the cue came. The orchestra swelled, the light changed, and the stage manager whispered, "You're on, Mr. Hanks." But Tom didn't move. At first, no one noticed. The applause died down, expecting his slow walk toward the podium. But seconds ticked past. The screen still showed his name. The microphone buzzed. Still no Tom. Keanu took a step forward instinctively, then paused. Sandra touched his arm lightly. "Wait," she whispered. "Let's see if he's okay." But the moment had passed. Tom took one trembling step forward, then paused halfway toward the microphone, hand on his chest. Not dramatic, not falling, just overwhelmed. His other hand reached back, not for help, but for grounding. And it was Keanu who moved first. Not with the rush of panic, but with the grace of someone who understood what it meant to hold another human being when they were breaking in silence. He stepped onto the stage, cameras still rolling, murmurs growing in the crowd, and gently placed a hand on Tom's back. "I got you," Keanu whispered, just loud enough for the microphone to pick up. The theater went utterly still. Sandra followed without hesitation. Her heels made soft taps on the wood stage, but her eyes never left Tom's face. She had seen that look once before on her father in the final months. It was a face that wanted to stay strong, wanted to keep performing for the world, even as something inside had begun to slip. Keanu held Tom's elbow. Sandra stood on his other side, softly smiling as she reached for the paper in his hand. "Tom," she whispered gently, "you don't have to carry this moment alone." And in that moment, something extraordinary happened. Tom Hanks, two-time Oscar winner, the very soul of cinema, looked at both of them, eyes glassy but grateful, and nodded slowly. Would you read it with me?" he asked, voice hoarse. Keanu smiled gently and said, "We'd be honored." And together, the three of them, Tom Hanks, Sandra Bullock, and Keanu Reeves, stood at the podium under the golden glow of the spotlight and began reading the announcement. But halfway through the name of the recipient, Tom paused again. "Actually," he said, voice steadier now, "before I read this, there's something I need to say." You could hear a pin drop in the Dolby Theater. He looked out at the crowd, at the faces of legends and newcomers, friends and strangers, and then back at the cameras, beyond which millions were watching. "I almost didn't make it tonight," he confessed. "Not because of health, not because of age, but because I didn't think I had anything left to give to this industry. I've been silently grieving, and I thought I had to hide it. But these two," he gestured towards Sandra and Keanu, "reminded me that sometimes the bravest thing we can do is accept help." The entire theater was silent, not because they didn't know what to say, but because they were too moved to speak. "I lost someone close this year," Tom continued. "Someone who always told me, don't just play the hero, be one in real life when it matters. And I forgot how to do that. I forgot that even heroes can feel small, that even legends get tired. But tonight I was reminded that there is strength in softness and there is dignity in asking for help." Tears filled Sandra's eyes. Keanu gently lowered his gaze, emotional but still steady, still holding that moment like a shield. Tom inhaled deeply. So I dedicate this moment not to the recipient of the award, but to every person out there who's struggling silently. You matter, you are enough, and you don't have to do it alone. The entire audience rose in applause, not the rehearsed, polite kind, but something raw, real. A standing ovation not for a performance, but for honesty. And as the applause thundered on, Keanu gently leaned toward Sandra and whispered, "This wasn't in the script." She smiled with glistening eyes. The best parts of life never are. A table for three, and a memory no one expected. Later that night, far from the lights and buzz of the Dolby Theater, the streets of Los Angeles moved on like any other evening. Limousines rolled past. Paparazzi gathered where they thought the next photo would pay the most. But in a quiet corner of Beverly Hills, inside a small restaurant closed for a private reservation, 3 chairs sat occupied at a modest round table by the window, where no cameras could see. Keanu Reeves sat to the left, elbows gently resting on the edge of the mahogany surface, his black jacket now folded over the back of his chair, his once polished shoes slightly scuffed after the long night. Across from him, Sandra Bullock, her hair loosely tied back, still wore the stunning emerald green dress, though she had kicked off her heels hours ago and curled her feet beneath her. And in between them, Tom Hanks, with a warm cup of chamomile tea steaming gently in his hands, looked older than he had ever looked in any film, but somehow more alive than he had appeared all year. It was a silence that didn't need to be filled, not right away. Just the soft clinking of utensils, the occasional hum of the waitress in the distance, and the quiet breath of 3 people who had once been industry giants and were now, in this moment, just people. Friends. Human beings who had crossed enough years, enough heartbreaks, and enough unspeakable losses to understand when not to speak, and when to simply be there. But eventually, as dessert plates were cleared and the tea was refilled, it was Sandra who leaned forward, her eyes steady on Tom's. "What happened, Tom?" she asked softly. "Before you went on stage, what were you remembering?" Tom stared into his tea for a long moment, not as if searching for the words, but as if the steam reminded him of something he hadn't allowed himself to see in years. Then he looked up, voice rough but clear. "My son," he said. "Not the ones you know, I had another. His name was Adam." Both Keanu and Sandra froze, not because they were shocked by the revelation, but because they knew enough about this industry, this world, to know that sometimes grief hides in the most invisible corners. Tom continued, his voice a little steadier now, as though speaking the name out loud gave him permission to finally remember. "Adam was my firstborn, quiet boy, liked writing, hated the spotlight. When I got famous, he pulled away, not out of anger, just didn't want to live in my shadow. We lost touch for a while. He started a nonprofit in Detroit. Didn't want help, didn't want money, just wanted to change lives in his own way." He took a deep breath. 2 months ago he passed, cardiac arrest, alone, I didn't even know he was sick. Sandra's hand instinctively reached across the table, resting over his. "Oh, Tom." He nodded, grateful but still trembling. "I didn't tell anyone, not even Rita. I didn't know how. I thought if I just kept working, kept smiling, maybe it wouldn't be real. But tonight, standing on that stage, looking out at all those faces, I realized it wasn't the movies or the fame or the legacy that haunted me. It was that I never got to say goodbye." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was filled with ache and memory, and the kind of sorrow only other broken souls could understand. Keanu didn't speak for a long moment, but when he did, his voice was low, almost too gentle to be heard over the quiet music playing in the background. "My brother died in front of me," he said. "You don't forget that." Sandra turned to him slowly, her eyes wide but not surprised, more heartbroken, because she had known there were parts of Keanu Reeves no camera would ever reach, and this was one of them. Keanu looked down, hands folded like he was holding something precious and fragile. "It was years ago, a car crash. We were just kids, barely out of college. He was driving me home. We had argued about something stupid, probably music or girls, and then boom, just like that. Metal twisted, windshield shattered, glass in my face. He didn't make it." He didn't cry. Keanu had a way of expressing grief that was quiet and noble, like a lighthouse refusing to fall even as the storm battered against it. But his hands were trembling, and Sandra noticed. She placed her hand on his without a word. "That's why you disappeared from the spotlight that year," Tom said, realization washing over him. You dropped a film mid-production. No one knew why. We all thought it was a meltdown. Keanu gave a half-smile. Everyone always assumes drama, but no, I wasn't broken. I just needed time to remember how to feel again. I needed silence. And to this day, I still visit the spot where it happened. Every year, same day, I take flowers, I sit, I tell him I'm sorry. Sandra's voice was barely above a whisper now. And does it help? Keanu looked up at her, eyes tired but sincere. No, but it keeps me human. For a while, no one spoke again. The night had taken a turn none of them expected. But somehow it felt right. Because under all the shine and glitter, the fame and applause, they were still just people who had lost, who had loved, who had learned that strength wasn't in pretending, it was in feeling everything and still choosing to show up. Then Sandra slowly leaned back and began speaking, not in her usual confident voice, but with the softness of a wound finally breathing. I miscarried, she said. Twice. During the peak of my career, I never told anyone, not even my closest friends. I thought, if I kept working, if I stayed busy, maybe I wouldn't feel like a failure. Tom and Keanu turned to her, stunned not by the words but by the bravery it took to say them. She swallowed, eyes shimmering. I used to sit in those hospital rooms, surrounded by white walls, sterile air, and wonder if I had done something wrong. Too many stunts, too much stress, not enough rest. And every time I walked back into a premiere or onto a red carpet, I smiled like I wasn't bleeding inside, like I didn't want to scream. Tears now glistened on her cheeks. But tonight, when you couldn't walk out, Tom, I saw that same look in your eyes, the one I saw in the mirror back then, the look of someone carrying too much. And I realized maybe we're all carrying something, and maybe, just maybe, it's okay to let someone else carry it with you. Keanu nodded, his voice barely audible. Maybe that's why we were all meant to be there tonight. They sat in silence again, but this time it was filled with something new. Not pain, not sorrow, but healing. The kind that doesn't come from therapy or fame or applause, but from shared humanity. Sandra finally stood, walking toward the window, looking out at the empty street where the lights reflected on the wet pavement like stars in a puddle. We always think the world wants us for our image, she said. But tonight, I realized, maybe what the world needs is our truth. Tom slowly rose too, his posture a little straighter now, his hands no longer trembling. I've been acting all my life, he said, but tonight was the first time I felt real. Keanu chuckled softly, then let's keep being real. Sandra turned, smiling through the tears, even if it breaks us. Keanu walked over, joining her at the window, especially if it does. And in that moment, without makeup, without scripts, without costumes or press, three of Hollywood's most beloved actors stood together, not as stars but as survivors, as wounded hearts still beating, as humans who had learned that being strong wasn't about holding it all in, it was about letting it all out in the presence of people who wouldn't let you fall. The lights outside flickered. A breeze moved through the open window. And for the first time in years, Tom Hanks smiled, not the camera smile, not the award-winning grin, but the smile of a man who had finally been seen. The letter Adam never mailed. The sun rose slowly over Los Angeles the next morning, pushing soft gold through the clouds like fingers stretching across the bruised sky after a storm. The city, as usual, was already busy, traffic humming, espresso machines hissing in overpriced cafes, and morning talk shows buzzing with edited clips from the Academy Awards. But tucked behind tall hedges and surrounded by the scent of lavender and aging oak trees, Tom Hanks's home felt completely still. Not lifeless, but caught in that rare moment between grief and grace. He hadn't slept much, not from insomnia, but from the silence after confession. The kind of silence that both heals and echoes. The night had left him cracked open, but no longer hollow. He had spent hours after Keanu and Sandra dropped him off just walking his home, his fingers brushing along old family portraits, his late son's guitar still resting untouched in a corner, the smell of old books lingering like memories refusing to fade. He had just poured his first cup of coffee when the doorbell rang. It wasn't loud, just a single soft chime, but it struck something deep, as if the timing itself wasn't coincidence but choreography from a force he couldn't quite explain. He opened the door to find a man in a postal uniform, a bit older, eyes gentle. "Morning, Mr. Hanks. Sorry to bother you personally. This one didn't go through the usual channels, said it was hand-routed, stamped years ago, delayed. We were told to get it to you today, specifically today." Tom took the envelope, confused, and thanked the man. The address was handwritten in uneven script, the ink faded. And then he froze. because the return name in the top left corner read Adam T. Hanks. His heart stopped. The world didn't spin. It shattered and rebuilt itself in a second. He closed the door slowly, hands trembling as he carried the envelope like it might vanish if he blinked. It was sealed but worn like it had survived time, distance, maybe even intention. He sat down, the kitchen suddenly too quiet. His breath shaky, fingers cold, he opened the envelope like opening a scar. Inside, a single page, yellowed slightly. A typewritten letter because Adam had always loved vintage things. No email, no text, always letters. Tom read, "Dear Dad, if you're reading this, it means I probably never got the courage to give this to you myself. Or maybe I did and you forgot it in one of your movie star bags. Who knows? I'm writing because I'm tired of pretending I'm not your son, not out of shame, never that. You've always been the hero on screen, the good guy, the one the world claps for. But I needed to know who you were off screen, too. I needed you not as a role model, but as a father. Someone who could sit beside me even when I failed. Even when I didn't become anything the world thought I should be." Tom's eyes blurred. His fingers clenched the page tighter. "No, we drifted. You got busy being the icon. I got busy trying to find myself outside your shadow, and in the process, we lost each other. But I need you to know something. I was never angry. I was just scared you'd never know who I really was. I didn't want your money. I wanted your voice, your time, one dinner without cameras, one afternoon where I was the disappointment. But maybe I was too proud to say that in person. Maybe I'm still afraid of hearing you say you didn't have time." Tom stopped reading for a moment, his throat closing around a sob he didn't see coming. He stood, walked slowly into the hallway, and stared at the family photo that had always been missing one. The one he never let hang on the wall because it reminded him too much of the distance he never dared to confront. He continued reading. "I hope you get this, and I hope if I'm gone you don't bury this with guilt. I just needed you to know I loved you, even when I didn't say it, even when you were just a name on a screen to me. I loved you because you taught the world how to feel. I just wish you knew how to feel it back home. But maybe in another life we'll get to sit on a porch, share a beer, and just exist as two men who tried their best. Your son, Adam." The letter fell from Tom's hand like a paper version of gravity giving up. And with it, Tom fell to his knees. The ache that came wasn't performative. It wasn't even dramatic. It was quiet. A surrender. A letting go of years of controlled pain. The kind of collapse that happens when truth finally reaches the bones. He didn't answer his phone that morning, or the one after, but Keanu did. And when Sandra asked how Tom was, all he said was, "I think he found a ghost." By afternoon, Keanu and Sandra stood again on Tom's front porch, not in tuxes, not in gowns, but in jeans and old jackets, coffee in hand. Tom opened the door wordlessly, but his face said everything. They didn't ask questions. He handed them the letter. Sandra read it silently, her hand pressed over her mouth. Keanu read slower, every word hitting him like a verse he didn't know he needed. Keanu looked at Tom. "Do you think he wanted you to read this today, on purpose?" Tom nodded slowly. "I don't think Adam ever did anything without purpose. He knew I'd crack someday. He just didn't want me to crack alone." The three sat in the living room, the letter placed gently on the coffee table like an altar. They talked for hours, about letters they never sent, people they never forgave, and the versions of themselves that still haunted them. And then Keanu said something that shifted the entire weight of the day. "What if this wasn't just a goodbye? What if it's a beginning?" Sandra leaned in, curious. "What do you mean?" Keanu looked at the letter again. "Adam ran a nonprofit, right? Helping others, changing lives. Maybe this is more than a personal closure. Maybe he left you a map." Tom blinked. "A map?" Keanu nodded, to something unfinished. That night, Tom pulled out the old laptop Adam had sent back a year before his death. It had been sitting in storage, unopened. He hadn't had the courage to explore it. With Keanu and Sandra beside him, he powered it on. The screen flickered, then came to life. And what they found wasn't what any of them expected. Not files of personal journal entries, not photos of parties or work meetings, but a folder named, "For Dad if he ever shows up." Inside were spreadsheets, video testimonials, stories from people Adam had helped, youth from the inner city, addicts who had found purpose, single mothers given housing, students funded to attend college. And at the center of it all, a plan. A 10-year plan Adam had built to create a national network of safe houses and education centers. But it was incomplete. It needed funding. It needed visibility. It needed a voice. Keanu leaned forward, his voice barely a whisper. "He didn't want your money, but he built something that still needs your name." Tom stared at the screen for a long time, then at his hands. "All these years, I thought I was acting in films that changed the world, but maybe my son was the real actor in the background. No spotlight, just action." Sandra stood, suddenly charged with purpose. "Then let's finish what he started." Tom looked up, hope trembling in his eyes. "You'd help me." Keanu smiled, that quiet, grounded Keanu smile that always meant more than 1,000 words. "Not as fans, not as stars, as friends, as humans, as people who finally understand what legacy really means." That night, under the same stars that had once shone over red carpets and premieres, a new kind of light began to rise. Not from Hollywood, but from something deeper, something real. A project began to take shape, one not designed for cameras or applause, but for healing, for connection, for every broken child who needed a safe place and for every father who needed a second chance to be one. The next morning, the world would wake up to headlines about Tom Hanks's powerful speech, about Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock's surprise on-stage appearance, about emotion and vulnerability in Hollywood. But none of them would know what truly happened after the curtains closed. Not yet. Because this wasn't the end of the story. It was only the beginning. The spotlight's shadow and the man behind the curtain started like most Hollywood whispers do, soft, twisted, and suspiciously well-timed. What began as a deeply private intention rooted in loss and purpose slowly began leaking into the mainstream like water under a locked door. Only this time the leak had an agenda. The very morning after Tom Hanks, Keanu Reeves, and Sandra Bullock quietly registered Adam's nonprofit into a living trust under the name The Lantern Project. A smear article popped up on a second-rate entertainment site. The headline read, "Is Tom Hanks using his son's death for sympathy fame?" It spread like wildfire. Screenshots, blogs, Twitter threads, podcasts dissecting his on-stage moment, questioning its authenticity. The cruel irony, none of them knew about the letter. None of them knew about the safe houses, the volunteers, the unfinished legacy. All they saw was a vulnerable man and two compassionate friends and smelled blood in the water. Tom sat at his kitchen table that morning, stunned, the screen of his iPad glowing with the article's venom. He wasn't angry, not yet, mostly numb. This was the same city that had praised him for decades, given him trophies for pretending to be other people. Now it turned its fangs on him the moment he tried to do something real. Across the table, Keanu sat with arms crossed, reading quietly. He didn't speak for a long while. But his eyes darkened, not with fear, but with something ancient and sharp. A kind of quiet wrath only people who'd endured injustice in silence could understand. Sandra stood at the window, her phone buzzing nonstop with publicist calls, manager emails, studio warnings. She turned to them, her voice calm but fierce. "I can kill this story," she said. "I have friends, real ones, not tabloid leeches. I can make a call to Vogue, Vanity Fair, maybe even Opera. We'll go on air. Tell the truth." Tom exhaled slowly. "And what? Make it a show." Sandra walked over, eyes steady. "No, Tom, make it human. People believe lies faster than they believe pain, but if they see us, really see us, they might remember how to feel again." Keanu finally spoke, voice low but iron beneath velvet. "The moment we speak, we become vulnerable to them all. We're opening the gates." Tom looked up, his voice quieter. "But maybe we need to." They agreed, not for fame, not for redemption, but for Adam, for the truth, for every young soul who needed those safe houses more than the world needed its next viral scandal. The very next day, the three of them walked into a modest production house. No red carpet, no stylist, no team of handlers. Just a single camera, a black backdrop, and three people willing to let the world watch them bleed with dignity. The interview aired 2 nights later, raw, unedited, and unscripted. The world watched in silence as Tom Hanks read the letter from Adam aloud, his voice cracking but never breaking. As Keanu shared his own grief, not for the first time, but finally for the right reasons. As Sandra spoke of miscarriages and regret, of strength forged through vulnerability. There were no flashy graphics, no sweeping violin music, just truth, plain and unvarnished. And when the video ended, there was no applause. Only stillness, a pause across the internet, a moment where millions simply stopped scrolling. But not everyone was moved. Behind that first viral hit, behind the spin machine, sat one man, Clive Anders, a media executive with deep ties to entertainment gossip, corporate PR, and Hollywood's older, colder machinery. Clive wasn't in the business of helping people. He was in the business of controlling stories. And Tom Hanks stepping out of the industry's predictable box threatened the system more than anyone dared admit. A-list celebrities uniting around a grassroots humanitarian cause outside any studio control? That didn't fit the brand. It wasn't monetizable. It wasn't market-tested. And worse, it was sincere. Clive made the call that night. "Destroy it," he said to his team. "Dig into the nonprofit, tax records, family drama, find something, anything." Within 48 hours, an anonymous post surfaced claiming Adam had failed at multiple ventures, that his nonprofit had gone bankrupt 3 years ago, that he was estranged from his father not by distance, but by scandal. The post didn't even reference real documents, but the doubt had been seeded. Talk shows picked it up. Pundits speculated. Keyboard warriors debated. Tom was devastated. "What if we're hurting his name more than honoring it?" he asked Sandra one night, the weight in his voice no longer sorrow, but something worse, hesitation. "What if this was a mistake?" Sandra walked toward him, standing in front of the old fireplace where Adam's guitar now hung in quiet tribute. "You didn't make a mistake, Tom. You're just ahead of the truth, and the truth always bleeds before it heals." Keanu entered the room, phone in hand. "I found something," he said, "someone we need to meet." That someone was Joy Herrera, a woman in her early 30s, raised in East Detroit, formerly addicted to opiates, now a trauma counselor with 3 degrees, running a safe house for youth in her neighborhood. And she credited it all to one man, Adam Hanks. Joy sat with them the next afternoon in the Lantern Project's barely furnished office, her voice clear, her memory sharp. "Adam saved my life. When everyone else looked away, he saw me. He didn't just give me money, he gave me time. He drove me to my first interview. He stayed up with me during withdrawals. He believed in me when I was spitting blood and screaming that I wanted to die. And the only thing he ever asked in return was this, that I do the same for someone else someday." Her eyes filled. "Now I do every day." Keanu leaned forward, almost whispering, "Would you tell that story, on record?" Joy nodded, smiling. "I've waited years to say it out loud." They began filming testimonials. Not glossy, not rehearsed, just real. One after another, people stepped forward, students, nurses, ex-convicts, social workers, all carrying the fingerprints of a man the media claimed was irrelevant. They spoke of quiet nights Adam spent in shelters, of food he bought with his own paychecks, of conversations that never made it to Instagram. And slowly, the tide began to turn. The Lantern Project's website, once a quiet memorial, exploded overnight. Donations surged, volunteers poured in, but so did opposition. Clive wasn't finished. He pulled strings, pressured sponsors, whispered into the ears of board members and old studio partners. "If you support Hanks, you risk your deals." The message was clear: fall in line or fall apart. One by one, former friends began distancing themselves. Tom was told to focus on legacy roles, not activism. Keanu was warned he might lose financing on a long-gestating script. Sandra's charity gala lost 2 sponsors within a week. The pressure was calculated, clinical, and brutal. But it didn't break them. Instead, it did something else. It sharpened their purpose. They doubled down, held town halls, streamed live talks, visited shelters, sat on cold benches beside runaways and told them they mattered. The media could twist, but the people knew. The real ones always know. And then came the unexpected blow that no one saw coming. One night after returning from a youth center in Oakland, Tom opened his inbox to find a message labeled confession. It was from a former assistant at one of Clive Anders's companies, a whistleblower. The message included attachments, emails, internal memos, contracts that traced back to Clive's agency and exposed an even darker truth. Clive had once tried to purchase Adam's original nonprofit years ago, intending to rebrand it under a celebrity name for tax write-offs. Adam refused, said it wasn't for sale. Weeks later, city funding dried up, permits stalled, leases pulled. The smear that followed had driven Adam to shut everything down and start again from scratch. This time underground, in community basements, with zero visibility. Tom sat frozen. He had never known, never even suspected. His son hadn't told him. Because Adam had protected him. Even in pain. Even in betrayal. Even while starting over alone. Tom stood up slowly, heart thundering. "I need a press conference," he said. "No agents, no handlers, just me." Keanu and Sandra didn't argue. They simply stood beside him. The next morning, standing before a room full of flashing cameras, Tom Hanks stepped up to the microphone. His face was calm, not rehearsed, not angry, but clear. My son died with the world thinking he failed, he began. But he didn't. He simply refused to sell his soul, and that refusal cost him everything except his integrity. He didn't live for applause, he lived for people, for healing. And the truth is that someone tried to bury his name and they almost succeeded. He paused. But you can't bury light, you can't silence kindness, and you can't outlast love. The room was silent. Even the most hardened reporters lowered their eyes. I'm not fighting this battle for publicity, Tom said. I'm fighting for a legacy that chose quiet impact over loud vanity, and if that threatens a system built on illusion, so be it. He stepped down, and just like that, the world began to shift. The weight of the world and the secret Adam kept. The weeks that followed were a blur of flashing cameras, rising donations, sleepless nights, and public pressure that no human being, no matter how iconic, was built to withstand. The Lantern Project, once a fragile idea born from a grieving father's chest, had now become a national movement. Schools invited them. Senators called. Activists reached out. Trauma centers sent letters begging for connections, funding, training. Joy Herrera became a public voice for surviving the darkest nights. Keanu Reeves became the quiet backbone of logistics, making calls, attending meetings in worn jeans and a faded black t-shirt, slipping into boardrooms where executives whispered in awe when they saw who had walked in. Sandra Bullock traveled nonstop, visiting safe houses, speaking to women who had been trapped in cycles of harm, holding hands with children whose eyes carried the weight of old souls. But no matter how wide the movement grew, the center of it, the heart of it, was Tom Hanks. And Tom was beginning to fade. Not dramatically, not suddenly, but quietly, the way real exhaustion creeps into the bones of someone who has carried too much for too long. There were nights when Keanu would call him and wait through long silences before Tom could find the strength to speak. There were days when Sandra saw him rubbing his chest or blinking away dizziness, brushing it off as fatigue or age. But something in him had begun to shrink, not his spirit, but the vessel that carried it. He refused to stop. Every time they suggested he rest, he shook his head. No, Tom said softly. This isn't about me. This is about finishing what Adam started. If I stop now, then he dies twice. They didn't argue with him, not because he was Tom Hanks, but because love sometimes means letting someone run even when you fear how much it costs them. One quiet evening, after a long day filming a documentary-style segment for a global humanitarian platform, Sandra walked into Tom's study to find him slumped forward on his desk, asleep on a pile of handwritten letters Adam had saved from people he'd helped. His glasses rested crooked on the bridge of his nose, the lamp casting soft gold across lines on his face that looked deeper than they had ever been on screen. Sandra didn't wake him immediately. Instead, she stood in the doorway, her breath catching as memories flashed, her own father, her own grief, that same image of a man who carried too much alone. She approached gently, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Tom," she whispered, "you need sleep, real sleep." He stirred, blinking up at her as though pulled from a dream he didn't want to leave. "Did I fall asleep?" "Only for a moment," she said softly. "Come on, let's get you to bed." He nodded, then paused, his hand brushing over the old wooden desk. "I was reading one of Adam's journals," he said. "There's something in it that feels unfinished." Sandra frowned. "Like what?" Tom swallowed. He wrote about a place he visited months before he died, a house, but not a safe house, something bigger, something he said was the answer, but he never explained it. He handed her the leather-bound journal. Sandra took it carefully. The page was marked with a folded corner, the handwriting uneven but intense. "I found the place today, the one that could be everything. The one Dad always talked about when I was a kid. A place where broken people could heal without judgment, without noise, without cameras. It's perfect. It's hidden. It's safe. If something happens to me before I finish this, I hope he finds it. I hope he remembers why he once dreamed of changing the world quietly." Sandra's heart dropped. "Tom, what place was he talking about?" Tom inhaled slowly. "A cabin," he said. "In Big Sur. I told Adam about it when he was 7. It was my dream back then to build a place where the world couldn't reach me. A sanctuary." Sandra closed the journal gently. "Then tomorrow we go." The next morning, Keanu drove. He liked driving. It kept him grounded. The Pacific Coast Highway curved like a ribbon along the cliffs, the ocean roaring below as if echoing the storm inside all three of them. Tom rode quietly in the back seat, looking out the window, eyes heavy but alert. Sandra sat in the passenger seat, holding Adam's journal in her lap like a compass. They reached the edge of Big Sur just after noon, tall redwoods whispering secrets, the air thick with the scent of pine and salt. Keanu parked near a narrow dirt path leading deeper into the forest. "Is this it?" he asked. Tom nodded slowly. "Yes, I haven't been here in decades." The cabin wasn't large. It was simple, wooden, aging half hidden beneath moss and climbing vines. But when Tom stepped inside, the air shifted. Something sacred lingered within those walls, something waiting. It took them only minutes to find what Adam had left. Behind a loose floorboard near the fireplace lay a small metal box, old, cold, and sealed with a padlock. Tom's hands shook as he lifted it. "He was here," he whispered. "He really was here." Keanu examined the lock closely. Did Adam leave a key anywhere? Sandra crouched, searching, her fingers brushing against a thin strip of paper tucked behind the mantel. "Found something." She pulled out a folded note, Adam's handwriting again. "Dad, if you're here, it means you remembered. It means you cared enough to come back. The key is where you first taught me to trust the world again, under the stone that looks like a sleeping bear. You'll know the one." Tom closed his eyes. He knew exactly which stone Adam meant. They found it, half buried under fallen leaves behind the cabin. The key was tucked in a small hollow underneath, rusted but still intact. When Tom unlocked the metal box, the lid creaked open to reveal dozens of folded letters, all addressed to him. Letters Adam had written over the years. Letters he never mailed. Letters full of beginnings, endings, confessions, questions, anger, forgiveness, love, a lifetime of conversations never spoken. Tom read the first few lines of the letter on top and suddenly could not breathe. His knees buckled, and he sat on the old cabin floor as if gravity had become too heavy to fight. Keanu and Sandra sat beside him silently. Adam wrote, "Dad, if I die before I get to give these to you, I hope you don't just read them. I hope you hear them. I hope you understand that everything I built, every life I touched, came from you. Not from your fame, but from your stories, from your quiet kindness. From the way you looked at the world and saw people as they were, not as the world painted them. I know we drifted, but that doesn't erase the fact that you were my first hero, and sometimes heroes get tired, but they never stop returning to the fight. Maybe that's why I'm turning this cabin into something more someday. Maybe this is the beginning of something bigger, if you're brave enough to pick it up when I'm gone." Sandra closed her eyes, absorbing the magnitude of what Adam had left, not just for Tom, but for the world. Keanu spoke quietly, his voice steady. "This cabin, it's the heart of the Lantern Project. He wanted this to be the first sanctuary, a place not for cameras, not for programs, but for real healing." Tom nodded through tears. He remembered everything, even the dreams I forgot. They spent hours in the cabin, reading, talking, grieving, healing. When they finally stepped outside, something had shifted in all three of them. They were no longer carrying Adam's memory. They were carrying Adam's mission. The next few weeks became a whirlwind of planning. Keanu used his private resources to renovate the cabin, quietly, respectfully preserving its soul. Sandra coordinated with architects, therapists, counselors, and trauma specialists. Tom met with donors, but not to beg, to share, to invite, to inspire. Word spread, but so did Clive's resistance. He fired back with new allegations. Claimed the Lantern Project was a celebrity vanity project designed for awards season PR. Claimed Tom was using grief to manipulate audiences. He even hinted that Adam's death was not as simple as the public believed, a cruel insinuation meant to plant doubt, not truth. The media bit on it. Commentators speculated, trolls amplified. Newscasts ran segments with unnecessary dramatization. Tom's eyes dimmed each time he saw a headline warped beyond decency, but he didn't stop. Sandra noticed his breathing grow shallow. Keanu noticed him resting his hand on his chest more often, but Tom always brushed them off with a tired smile. One night, after a long meeting with the Lantern Project's board, Tom collapsed in the office hallway. Keanu caught him before he hit the floor. Sandra screamed his name. Doctors called it severe exhaustion, bordering on a cardiac event. He was ordered to rest for weeks. When he woke up in the hospital, Sandra sat beside him, holding his hand. Keanu stood by the window, arms folded, jaw tight. Tom tried to speak, but Sandra stopped him gently. No, listen, you gave the world decades. You gave your son everything you could. Now let us carry this. You don't have to lead alone anymore. Keanu stepped forward, voice soft but certain. We're not stepping back. We're stepping up. For Adam, for you, for every kid who needs this. Tom closed his eyes, tears slipping down his temples. For the first time, he let them carry him. Let them lead the fight. Let himself be human enough to rest. Sandra squeezed his hand. We've got this. And when you're strong enough, you'll walk into that cabin and see what your son already knew. The world still needs you, Tom, but not the actor, the father. And slowly, Tom nodded. Because at last, he believed her. The final light and the legacy that can't be taken. It was a crisp morning in early fall when the gates opened. The redwoods surrounding the old Big Sur cabin stood tall like ancient guardians, and the scent of pine mingled with the slow burning of ceremonial cedarwood. There was no press, no lights, no staged ribbon cutting. Just a worn wooden sign above the front porch that read simply, "The Lantern Sanctuary for Healing, for Silence, for Light." Beneath it stood Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock, side by side, holding nothing in their hands except the weight of all that had brought them here. Behind them, volunteers bustled quietly, preparing beds, placing flowers, laying out books, repainting corners that had been touched by time. And still, Tom Hanks had not yet arrived. It had been 3 months since the hospital, 3 months since doctors had told him he needed to choose between slowing down or burning out completely. And in that time, he had chosen something else entirely, stillness. He didn't disappear, not from the world, but from its noise. He went somewhere deep, somewhere only grief can take a man when he finally lets go of performance. And though he spoke less, he listened more to Adam's letters, to Joy's voice on the phone, to the sound of his own breath each morning when he realized he was still here, and still had something left to give. On the day the sanctuary opened, Keanu had hoped, but didn't expect Tom to come. But just as the first candle was lit inside the prayer room, a black car pulled slowly up the gravel path. He stepped out slowly, not as an icon returning to a stage, but as a father walking toward the final chapter of a story he never asked to tell. He wore no suit, just a dark sweater, soft pants, and in his hand, a single photograph. It was the one picture he had of Adam as a child, holding his hand at a small lake in Oregon, sunlight on their backs, the boy's eyes looking up with the kind of awe only children give before the world makes them question everything. When Keanu saw him, he didn't speak. He only walked forward, embraced him wordlessly, and held him for longer than most men allow. Sandra followed, her arms wrapping around both of them, and together they simply stood. Tom stepped up the porch slowly, his hand brushing the edge of the door. Inside the sanctuary, people waited, not guests, not celebrities, but survivors. People whose names would never be printed in magazines. Women who had escaped abusers. Children who had aged out of broken foster systems. Veterans who hadn't spoken a full sentence in years. Former inmates trying to start again. They had come not for charity, but for a second chance at humanity. Tom walked through the space Adam once dreamed of. His fingers grazed the edge of a bookshelf filled with handwritten journals donated by survivors. He stopped beside a mural painted by local artists, a phoenix wrapped around a lantern. And finally, he stepped into the central room where a stone bench faced a quiet window looking into the trees. There on the bench sat a sealed envelope. His name was on it. He looked to Keanu and Sandra, who only nodded gently. With hands that now trembled for a different reason, Tom opened the envelope. Inside was the last letter. Adam's final words. Dad, if you're here, then you found the place. You found the truth. You followed my breadcrumbs like you used to when I was a kid, hiding notes around the yard. I know you hurt. I know you blame yourself for things you never said. But let me say this now and let it sink in deep. I forgave you a long time ago. Not because you asked, but because I grew up and realized parents are just kids who got older. You did your best, and your best saved more lives than you'll ever know. If this sanctuary becomes real, then I ask one thing: don't let it become a brand. Let it stay human. Let people come here to fall apart and let them leave still broken if they must. Healing isn't a product, it's a process. And you, Dad, you're part of that process now. Live slower. Speak softer. Love louder. And when you walk out that door today, don't look back in regret. Just light the lantern. Late. Tom folded the letter carefully, tucked it into his coat, and sat on the bench for a long time, eyes fixed on the forest outside. Then he stood, walked to the center of the sanctuary, and lit the first lantern. The sanctuary opened that day without ceremony, only intention. And the world didn't explode in reaction. It shifted, quietly, like the way morning fog rolls back from the sea. One visitor turned to 5. 5 became 20. Stories were shared, tears were not hidden, and the internet for once didn't mock it. They listened. Some even showed up not in private jets or designer shoes, but with tired eyes and open hands. Meanwhile, Clive Anders, the man who had tried so hard to destroy everything, found himself exposed in a way no PR firm could undo. The whistleblower's documents had gone viral. Sponsors dropped him. He resigned before the board could fire him. And in a poetic stroke of justice, one of the nonprofit media outlets he once dismissed did a full profile titled, "The Man Who Tried to Kill a Lantern." Clive vanished from public life, but no one really cared. Because the story had moved on. The world had moved on. And the sanctuary, the Lantern Project, had become what Adam dreamed of, a place where no one had to earn their right to feel safe. Weeks later, on a calm evening in November, Sandra Bullock walked into the sanctuary alone after a long shoot in New York. She looked around the quiet garden, and there he was, Tom Hanks, sitting on a bench, reading aloud to a young boy who had survived a house fire and hadn't spoken in almost a year. His voice was soft, steady, gentle, and the boy, eyes wide, face calm, nodded as he listened, not just to the words, but to the man, to his heart. Sandra waited quietly until the story ended. The boy smiled, whispered something into Tom's ear, then stood and walked away slowly, his small feet brushing through fallen leaves. Tom looked up, surprised to see her. Sandra smiled, still changing the world. Tom chuckled, eyes misty, just reading. She sat beside him. He said something to you. Tom nodded. He said, "You sound like someone who knows how to fix things." Sandra reached over, took his hand. "That's because you are." They sat together in silence, the way people do when the need for words has finally passed. And when Keanu arrived later that night, carrying a tray of hot tea and fresh bread donated by a local baker, he didn't say anything either. He just joined them. 3 actors, 3 humans, 3 broken hearts still beating, lit by a lantern, in a place the world almost never knew. A place Adam built. A place the world now needed more than it ever realized.